Hello, my name is Carlos St. James, and I'm with the Leander Foundation. We're a recently established nonprofit organization that has been set up to help promote the sustainable growth of our city in ways that continues to increase the quality of life of our residents. Now, few things affect our quality of life more than actually having access to good parks and recreations facility. And so the video we're putting together today addresses that issue. It shows us in absolute terms where we stand. It shows us in comparative terms with other neighboring cities where we are, and actually has some ideas about what we can do about improving what we have given a high growth situation in our city. So let's jump right into it, if I may, and show you. Now, all of us who live here in Leander, we know that we really enjoy our parks and recreations. Our latest addition, the Lakewood Park, for example, is truly a gem. It is a world-class park. And the Parks and Recreations Department has done a great job of adding that property and actually giving us a lot of different recreational activities that we can enjoy during the summer and in the winter as well. Um, but it's insufficient. Given the growth that we're experiencing, I'd like to show you just how hamstrung the department is and how we're increasingly getting into a shortfall situation that merits some attention. So take a look at this little chart here that actually shows some of our neighboring towns and what kind of park acres they have per resident. The column that you want to see is the one on the right. It basically takes a city's park acreage, it divides it by its population, and it gives you a ratio. And as you can see here, using cities that are more or less from central Texas, we have ratios that are all over the place, from as high as 22 park acres per resident, per 1,000 residents in the case of Austin, down to 8 in the case of Waco, Texas. Of course, the higher the number in the abstract, the more attractive it is. So the question for us is, within this very big spread, where does Leander fit? And unfortunately, Leander fits the very bottom of this list. We have officially 467 park acres and other properties along those lines that are included there. And given our population of 72,000, it gives us a ratio of only 6.5 park acres per 1,000 residents. And as you can see there, it's not even half of what the average is for this select group here as well. So there's something that we need to address, especially given that that denominator, the population number, is going to be growing at a very fast pace over the next few decades. So it's something that merits a little more attention. So let's start by looking at our park properties now and the ones that are coming on. I've broken them down here with a red line. Above the red line are the assets, the properties that we enjoy today, the parks, trails, and a few other assets as well. And below the red line are the ones actually that are coming on fairly soon. All of them at the very bottom, you can see add up to the 467 acres that I used in the previous slide. Now, this includes things like San Gabriel Park, that whose land has been acquired, but we actually haven't converted it into a park just yet, and things like the Senior Center, where again, the money's been raised, but it actually hasn't been built just yet. So it's imminent, it's coming on fairly soon. Now, if we want to look at the assets, the properties that we can enjoy today as citizens, the actual number today is 343 acres. So let's go back to this list. If we actually incorporate that number of 343 acres, what we see is that that ratio of park acreage goes down to below 5. And this is the number that should raise some eyebrows. We're a community here in Leander that really, we pride ourselves in actually having good quality of life, of being very family oriented. And of course, with a lot of young children, a great school district, it behooves us to make sure that we actually have parks and recreation facilities that are on a par of a city that has that level of quality, education and quality of life and family values. So this is something that is the topic that we're going to be addressing here. Now, the National Parks and Recreations Association out of Washington collects information for all parks and recreations departments across the country, and then of course clusters them by city size. And in our case, given that we have 75 to 80,000 residents right now, we fit in the cities that are between 50 and 100,000 in population. And what I'd like to do is show you here just two variables: the typical operating budget that a Parks and Recreations Department has on any given year, and the staffing levels they normally have. So in the case of the annual operating budget, a typical city of our size has an annual budget of something over $7 million a year to play with. In the case of Leander this year, the budget is just under $2.4 million. There's a very tight constraint on money available to spend. Now let's look at staff as well. A city of our size typically has 61 full-time equivalent staff on their Parks and Recreations Department, and in the case of Leander, we have only 27. So again, you see here that our Parks and Recreations Department is providing services for a town that's between 70 and 80,000 people, and doing a great job given these enormous constraints of we are short on budget, we're short on staff, and we're certainly short on parks and recreations properties that we can enjoy. Now, let's go through a little exercise and see what's it's going to take as far as acreage going forward. What you're seeing here is one of the estimates of what our population is going to be over the next 30 years to 2050. The number we have there of 235,000 actually was obtained from the link that you see there at the bottom. There are other studies that show that we'll end up having a higher number than that in population, others that show a lower number. For the case, for the purposes of this little exercise, let's just stick with this number. And let's further decide that as a community, we want to get from that 6.5 park acres per thousand residents that we have today and bump it up to 10. Now, remember, that doesn't even put us at the top half within our central Texas range. It actually doesn't even put us at the average for the country. All it really does is actually get us out of the basement and at least into the double digits. Okay, so it's a noble effort, but it's a minimalist effort. Now, given this population growth, what does that mean as far as how much we need to have in park acreage and trails and things like that? And what this is telling us then is that by the year 2050, we need to have over 2,300 acres worth of parks and recreations properties. And on a decade to decade basis, this is more or less how it needs to grow. We need to add close to 1,900 acres in the next 30 years. And significantly, if you take a look at this, if we establish this as something of a goal in the next 10 years alone, actually less than 10 years, we need to practically double the size of our parks and recreations. This is not a small thing, and hopefully this actually is gives us pause for concern, given that that's a massive undertaking in a situation where our property taxes are already high enough, and yet something needs to be done given that that growth is going on. The city has to compete, investors need to compete between property for residential purposes, for commercial purposes, for industrial, and now we need to make sure that it's set aside so that there's sufficient property available for parks and recreations if we want to maintain that quality of life level that we currently enjoy right now. Okay, so here's where we start talking about money. Again, this pie chart comes from the National Parks and Recreations Association, and it shows where a typical city gets its operating expenses from. And as you can see there in gold, the biggest piece, of course, is 61%, comes from where you'd expect, comes from property taxes, from people who live in any given community, and that makes sense. But note there's also a noteworthy piece there in orange, it's almost a quarter of it, that also comes from earned or generated revenues. These are user fees. These are fees that people pay, for example, to gain access to a swimming pool, maybe, or maybe when they sign up for Little League or things like that. Or sometimes they simply just pay to enter a fee, which is something that Georgetown, by the way, has done to white very successfully. So let's take a look at what does the pie chart look like for the city of Leander. And what it looks like is very differently. What we have is a very unsophisticated pie chart here. And for all practical purposes, we have one funding source for all our parks and recreations operating expenses, and that is our property taxes. Now, this is something, given the size of our city and how it's growing, it's time that we did something about that. And we, as the Leander Foundation, we were established specifically to address this issue. We are exactly the kind of legal entity that can attract the grants, sponsorships, and things like that. We can tap into corporate funding because we're tax deductible. We can tap into government funding at the state or at the federal level as well. And the goal here is that over time, basically, it will take some pressure off our property taxes because we'll be able to source funds from other sources as well so that we can actually continue to grow our parks and recreations, and it doesn't necessarily always have to come out of our very own pockets. So this is, of course, the noble goal. Now, throwing money at the problem is really not the situation. This needs to be done in an intelligent way, and it needs to be done in a sustainable manner. And this word is so important that we actually put it in our very mission statement as well. This needs to be done in a sustainable manner. Now, there's a specific meaning to that, and I'd like to address this as well. We at the foundation have established an early working relationship with the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure, the ISI, out of Washington, D.C. The ISI is an organization that has an amazing pedigree. It was established some 20 years ago by three of the oldest and best established engineering associations in the US, these three, who got together and realized that when it comes to infrastructure, the matter of sustainability had long been ignored in the US, and it was time to address it and address it in a very professional and a certifiable manner. Okay, so they established ISI, who then in turn partnered up with Harvard University, and they created ENVISION. ENVISION is essentially a framework that assesses sustainability and resiliency in infrastructure, and it's growing like crazy around the US and actually globally as well, as this becomes increasingly important. Now, what ENVISION does is it measures uh, its sustainability in 5 categories specifically, and 64 credits. What they end up doing when they're looking at a specific asset, a specific property, some piece of infrastructure, and parks qualify certainly, they look at their quality of life issues, at leadership, at how resources were allocated, issues of the natural world, and of course, climate and resiliency as well. And they come up with a rating for these things. As far as what kinds of infrastructure ENVISION rates, they've broken it down into 6. And the topic we want to bring up today is the one that's circled there in green, parks. We actually have a specific plan for Lakewood Park, which is truly a gem, and I'll get into that in a minute, so that we can certify that as the first sustainable park in all of Texas. But since I'm on this slide here, let me show you this. If we as a community start the process and begin to incorporate matters of sustainability in our everyday life and how we do things, we have an issue with water. It's well known. We don't have enough water. Our water is expensive, and we're not exactly sure where we're going to get it in the future. If we insist on incorporating sustainability issues into our water situation and have this addressed, we can make sure that we know exactly going forward what kind of water we'll get, what quality of water, if it's coming in a sustainable manner, and at what prices going forward as well. Not only that, the private sector can be assessed as well. There's a well-known project here in town called the Leander Springs Development. It's something like $1 billion project, mixed residential commercial. And one of its most noteworthy features is that it's going to have a giant lagoon in the middle, right? So that people can enjoy it, go swimming and doing all kinds of things. On paper, it looks like a great idea. It certainly looks lovely. The thing is, given our water situation here, there may be some merit to looking into actually ensuring that if not the entire $1 billion project, but certainly that lagoon be certified as sustainable, so that we as taxpayers, providing the tax breaks so that this project actually comes to fruition, we know what we're paying for, if it's actually water that's going to become available in a sustainable manner, and if it really can be something used in the long term without affecting our water rates, and if so, to what extent exactly. This is something that we think is something that's important as well. But back to ENVISION. ENVISION has certified all kinds of infrastructure projects, as you've seen over the last couple of decades now. In Texas, there are only 5 infrastructure projects that have been certified. 3 of them are up in Dallas, one in Houston, and one in San Antonio. Central Texas still doesn't have any, although we're hearing that there's some projects that are coming on of different kinds that are being assessed for their levels of sustainability. But importantly, here in the US alone, there are only about 6 municipal parks that have been certified as sustainable parks. And herein, we actually would like to leapfrog and establish Leander as a leader in these kinds of areas. So what is it we're looking to achieve here? We'd like to begin to establish Leander as a community that really embraces sustainability in all its forms, not just in infrastructure. And as an aside, this is something that actually comes with a lot of job creation, and really good job creation. If you could look at the kinds of jobs that are being created in the 21st century, the ones that will be in the highest demand, those that are sustainability related are typically near the very top of the list. And that's not going away. Not only that, these are exactly the kinds of jobs we want to attract into Leander, because they're very well-paying jobs. These are professional jobs. These are not fast food restaurant jobs. So there's another merit aside from this project we have with Lakewood Park, that if we start embracing these principles as a community, we can become a cluster where it's well known to actually be a system that we can actually hire people who do these things. Now, what our specific goal is here, for starters, is to get Lakewood Park certified as the very first sustainable park in all of Texas. It would be a great coup. The park is a gem. You've seen it. It was where we held Liberty Fest this year. It's a beautiful park, all brand new. The window for actually certifying it is closing now that it's already been set up. And certainly the Parks and Recreations team have done a spectacular job of putting that thing together. Now, if we manage to get this thing certified, what we want to do is use that achievement as a springboard to raise more money to acquire more parks for lands and just raise money. Again, we're a little bit behind the eight ball in Leander, right? So we can't argue that we have more parks than anyone else, but what we can be able to argue if we certify this is that we may be short on parks, but the parks that we do have are truly world-class properties. And this is something that we can certify and prove by from an independent body. This, I think, is something really important because it'll help tap us into additional funding that we need from, I mentioned, from corporations, from the private sector generally, from government at different levels, so that we can continue to acquire more and more properties and actually have the city that we're looking for. What does it mean now? What we're looking to do is get the city of Leander itself to join the ISI, become a member of ISI. And certainly the our foundation is more than happy to help cover those initial costs as well. Um, all that really means, though, is that Leander would be agreeing in principle. It's a soft promise to embrace all matters of sustainability and everything that it does. Okay. Now, if you take a look here at some of the public sector organizations, entities that have joined the organization over the last few years, within Texas here, I'd like to highlight that Austin has recently joined, so has Dallas, so has Houston, the Dallas Fort Worth Airport has joined, and so has the San Antonio River Authority. And interestingly, Cap Metro recently joined as well. They're working with ISI specifically on a project where they want to become one of the very first zero emissions public transportation systems in the US. Laudable goal. They're working on it, and certainly it's something that may show up very quickly in the Central Texas map that we saw recently there. So, what are our next steps? Certifying this Lakewood Park is going to cost in the neighborhood of $100,000. And what we're looking to do is seeing if we can actually get some initial expressions of interest to see if we can achieve that. What we're looking specifically in round numbers is if we can get 1,000 families or businesses in Leander to commit just $100 a piece, that's where we get to the hundred thousands that we need to certify this park. Now, what we're looking for here is not donations. We are not asking anyone to write us a check just now or give us a credit card number. What we want you to do is please go to this website, to our website here, go to this page and express your interest. We need to see if we can register people and say, okay, if this is what it is, if we answer all of your questions to your satisfaction and we actually manage to get enough commitments to close it to the $100,000, only then will we go and actually ask you for your credit card number or that check. Okay. But before we do any of that, we need to see if there's actually any interest within the city of Leander to actually go in this direction. If we think this is time and money well spent, if this is a project that we really want to embrace to increase the quality of life of our town. So again, this is where we stand now. Our city is growing in all kinds of directions at the same time. This is a nice problem to have. But among the challenges is that there's a lot of competition now for this real estate for all kinds of purposes. And we need to make sure that we can raise money for different purposes, especially along the lines of using them for parks and recreations. Um, I ask that you please go to that link. It's also on the description side of the website. Um, Fill in your expression of interest. Share this with everyone. Please write to us, comment over here, share this with as many people as you can, because we think this is a worthy cause. This is something that really is important. It needs to be done. And we'd love to have a conversation with you as residents here to see if this is how we want to go going forward. And of course, above all, we really need your help. We only not only are we asking for the money, but we'd love to get you engaged to help us join our organization and actually help with some of the work that needs to be done. We look forward to talking to you. Thank you so very much, and I look forward to seeing you very soon. Thank you.